A recent investigation uncovered how a cohort of extreme Trump supporters who falsely believe the election was stolen from him are actively influencing American politics. ProPublica has been tracking rhetoric from far-right media, including from Steve Bannon, a former chief strategist for President Trump. He's been calling on supporters to become precinct officers within the Republican Party. Despite being low-level positions, some officials are using their new influence to change the course of the country. Isaac Arnsdorf is one of the authors of the piece, and he joins me now. He's a reporter for ProPublica covering national politics. Isaac, welcome. Great to have you with us. So explain the precinct strategy for us, and how are far-right followers quickly seizing these positions?
So the idea here, which really started on Steve Bannon's podcast in February, which actually has tens of millions of downloads, is one of the most popular shows on Apple. And from there, really went viral across far-right media. And the idea was that Trump supporters needed to take over the party from the bottom up, because the reason, in their view, that Trump isn't president anymore is that once the election, they say, was stolen, the party let him down. The party didn't fight hard enough. And that by taking over the party through these bottom-level positions, they're gonna make sure that that doesn't happen again next time. And these precinct positions, which a lot of people probably aren't familiar with, actually have a lot of influence over not just the leadership within the party, but actually how elections are run around the country.
So tell us more about these people pursuing these precinct officer positions, and what patterns have you noticed about where they are seeking the posts?
So that we couldn't check every county in the country. There are 3,000. And we wanted to focus on the places that you're used to hearing about on election nights. You know, the states that decided the Electoral College last year, that decide control of Congress. So we focused on the competitive states, the electorally significant places. And we looked in right-wing media to see what are they talking about? Where are they talking about going? And then can we see if it's just, people talking on the internet, or are they actually going out and doing this? So the way that we substantiated that was we would call the local party officials in those places and say, hey, all of a sudden are tons of people calling you saying, I want to be a precinct chair. And which is, an unusual thing to do, because, most people aren't familiar with these jobs. And most of the time the answer was, yeah, absolutely. We've never seen anything like this before. Sometimes they kind of didn't really know why it was happening. And sometimes they had figured out that it was because of this whole Steve Bannon podcast and other far-right media. And sometimes the county chair was already someone new who had been elected on the strength of all these newcomers to the local party. So it was already having an effect moving up the party chain.
And what are traditional Republican members and strategists saying about this movement?
There's a range. There are some places where they are, like Michigan is a good example of this, where the party establishment is kind of trying to harness this grassroots energy, but not in a way that indulges just constantly fighting over the last election. So specifically what they're working on doing there is inviting these new activists to collect signatures for a ballot initiative, which they're hoping would be a way under the Michigan Constitution to restrict voting and get around the Democratic governor's veto. And in other places, there have been sort of similar tension between Republicans who think the election wasn't stolen, or recognize that the election wasn't stolen and that it's time to move on, versus these activists who want an audit like the one that the Senate GOP is doing in Arizona.
So do you see that becoming a real, point of division within the Republican Party? People who believe in the lie and people who recognize that the election was legitimate. Do you see that as a split that could make a difference in the party going forward?
Well, what our reporting shows is that the explicit premise of this whole movement is that the election was stolen, and the purpose of this of this movement and of taking over the party organization is to stop that from happening again. So it's a little bit different from thinking about the intra-party arguments of recent years, which have kind of been more about Trump supporters versus an anti-Trump faction. This is kind of like everyone supports Trump here. And the newcomers who are knocking down the door, wanting to kick out the old local party leadership because they're complaining that they didn't fight hard enough for Trump. Those party leaders are sitting there being like, well, what do you, I was here working for Trump. Where were you? I didn't see you knocking on doors in the last election. So I think part of what's new about this dynamic is everyone is pro-Trump, and really what they're arguing about is just the tactics, how far they're willing to go for Trump, how hard they're willing to fight for Trump, what they're willing to do to make sure that either they win the next election or that Republicans have the power to change or to affect the outcome of that election.
So, Isaac, to your point, what influence and changes have these precinct officers been able to make so far? And is there anything being done to counter their maneuvers?
Well, it's only been a few months since a lot of them got there, but we're definitely seeing them already putting these powers to use. And I want to give you an example from Wisconsin, where they are signing people up to be poll workers. And the way that it works in Wisconsin, actually, is that the local county party nominates poll workers, and the county clerk is actually required to hire those party nominees to run the election. Now, in the past, this really wasn't an issue because the county parties basically had other things that they thought it was more important for their volunteers to be doing on election day, like going to get out the vote. But now, some hard-line Republican county chairs are looking at this and saying, we need to stack those jobs with Republicans who are going to be in the polling place looking out for fraud.
Isaac Arnsdorf, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.